So can Tom Brady throw a good deep ball? It's a talking point that's been talked about a lot. People who are saying this move won't work out, a lot of the reason why they're saying that Brady won't be successful in Tampa Bay is because they're saying, hey, it's a Bruce Arians offense. Mike Evans is a great deep ball receiver. That's part of what makes him great. Bruce Arians obviously loves a ton of passes deep down the field. Will Brady be able to fit into this offense? And so what I did is I went back and checked out every single pass attempt he had with an attempt of over 20 yards. So where his intended target was 20 yards or further down the field, that's what I checked out. And last year, he went 26 for 67 on passes where his target was over 20 yards, which is just 38.8%, which is definitely not very good. Also, the yardage not too high. I mean, 749 yards, which is just 11.2 yards per attempt, which is obviously that would be amazing just in general. But keep in mind, your yards per attempt is obviously always going to be a lot higher when you're throwing the ball further down the field. He did have 7 touchdowns to just 3 interceptions, though, so that's a good thing. He only turned the ball over 3 times on those types of plays, so even though he didn't convert a ton of them, he was still able to get a passer rating of 97.2, which is pretty good. Again, your passer rating typically is going to be higher when you throw the ball further down the field because you get more chunk plays and more touchdowns. And also, I should mention, I'll get into the film in just a little bit, but I want to talk a little bit more about statistics real quick because I was thinking and I was saying, okay, well, that seems, fine, but we don't have much to compare it off of, so I should probably find some other things to compare it to. And so I figured, hey, what about his 2017 MVP season? Only a couple years ago. How was he at the deep ball then? Again, these are passes where his target is 20 yards or further down the field. At least that's where they end up once the ball gets there. So also, not a perfect stat because obviously sometimes someone's 20 yards down the field, but it's kind of over the middle and a pretty easy throw and things like that. Sometimes you're throwing it 50 yards down the field. It's a flawed stat, but every stat is flawed. In 2017, you'll notice that he did have a slightly better completion percentage, but he also threw the ball a ton deep down the field. I mean, he threw the ball 103 times past 20 yards down the field. So he got a lot more yards too, which is, 1397, but it's still only 13.6 yards per attempt. So a couple yards per attempt more than it was in 2019, which isn't nothing, but also you look at the just 6 touchdowns, so he threw less touchdowns despite the fact that he, had over 30 more attempts. It was 36 more attempts, and, he threw more interceptions. He threw one more interception, which meant that his passer rating as a whole actually went down to 92.2. Now, you could argue which season was better, but I think it's still fair to say that the numbers weren't that different. And, yes, his yards per attempt was a little bit higher in 2017, but his interception went up by 1. And again, keep in mind that, he threw less touchdowns despite the fact that he had plenty more attempts. He also had plenty more attempts to throw interceptions. So, that's kind of a push, but I still think it's interesting. So then I started thinking, well, wait, is Brady just not good at the deep ball in general? And I went back to his greatest season ever, 2007, where Randy Moss was out there in his prime. This was, the greatest offense in history up until this point. And even his numbers past 20 yards weren't necessarily that spectacular. He went 32 for 84, so completion percentage was actually the lowest out of the 3 years we've talked about. He did have the most amount of yards per attempt, his, over 1,200 yards through these passes, which is 14.8 yards per attempt. So definitely very good there. And 15 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. So, when he hit very well. But at the same time, he didn't hit very much that time either. So his passer rating was 100.7. Very good. But at the same time, that's only 3.5 points higher than it was back in last year in 2019. I mean, when you compare that to someone like Patrick Mahomes, who last year, what he was able to do is, even though he missed a couple games, he still had 73 attempts and hit on over half, which is good for completion percentage that far down the field. He also had just under 20 yards per attempt, and he had 15 touchdowns to just 3 interceptions. So the passer rating way higher than any of Brady's seasons at 121.2. Again, maybe it's a little bit unfair to compare Brady to Mahomes in terms of deep ball accuracy because that's what Mahomes excels at, and it's not really where Brady excels at. And that's actually kind of my point. In both 2007 and 2017, the two MVP winning seasons I talked about, Brady actually had a higher passer rating overall than he did when he was throwing the ball further than 20 yards down the field, which is just really largely unheard of. I mean, even take the last time we saw Marcus Mariota throw the ball deep down the field. We still saw numbers pretty comparable to Brady throwing the ball 20 plus yards down the field. And this is the quarterback who basically his whole thing is that he's pretty good at these medium range throws but can't throw the ball down the field. That's where he struggles the most at. And even with that, he ended up with a passer rating of 95.83. Admittedly, he only threw it 34 times down the field, so that probably factored in. He's probably not as good, but he still had a passer rating higher than his regular season passer rating when throwing it 20 plus yards down the field, whereas Brady, and arguably his two best seasons, and certainly his best season in 2007, his passer rating was significantly better when he was not throwing the ball deep, even though Randy Moss was there. There's a reason why I'm bringing this all up, and it's actually very important. So, I mean, people like to watch the tape, and I think the tape is important to watch, but the reality is you can watch a tape, and whatever your bias is, you can find things to fit your bias. If you're someone who says Brady can't throw the ball deep down the field, you can watch this play where it's a cover 3 zone, and Edelman is going to be running over the middle. But what's going to happen once the ball is snapped is that you're going to notice a Pittsburgh player who is supposed to cover deep, he kind of gets a little fooled here. He sees another New England player is open. He wants to run over and take that out of the way. But because of this, it now means Edelman is going to be completely wide open. And in fact, if Brady makes this good throw, they're going to get the ball probably close to the 35, maybe even the 30-yard line. However, Brady's just going to underthrow this one and it falls incomplete. Just a bad throw from Brady. That's all it was. Nothing really else needs to be said. However, later in that very same game, this play would happen where it's going to be a cover 1 blitz and you have a player running a deep route that could get into the safety zone. But again, you have to kind of wait and see what happens after the ball is snapped. And after the ball is snapped, you're going to notice that, okay, there's some separation, but not a ton. There is a safety deep, and so not a ton of separation with the receiver he wants to hit. It's going to take a near-perfect throw. And it wouldn't be a near-perfect throw. It would just be a perfect throw. Brady hits him. They get the touchdown just like that. And so, again, you could watch, I think these were even in the same quarter. They were definitely in the same half. So if you just watch this half of football and you were watching it through the lens of Brady can't throw deep, you have your evidence. And if you're saying no, Brady still can throw deep, you have your evidence. But I actually think there's a lot more to it than that. I think that the reality is Brady has never been the best deep ball thrower. We all know this. What makes Brady great is his mental game. That's always what we've said. He's not the best athlete to ever play the position, but he's one of the best athletes to ever play the position, and he's probably the smartest to ever play the position. And also, of course, he is very clutch in the big games. That's pretty much what we talk about with Brady. But the interesting thing is, with the deep ball, there's not really too much you can use your intelligence to be a factor of. I said that very weirdly and poorly. What I'm trying to say is that, there's not too many tells you can get deep. Typically, it's going to be deep already. There's only a couple of things that can happen. If you have someone running deep, the chances are, the reality is, it's going to be cover 0, cover 1, cover 2, cover 3, or cover 4. There's obviously variances. Obviously, there is a way you can have your football IQ come into play on a deep ball. Like, here's an example. It is going to be cover 4, and, there's a receiver running over the middle, and it's going to kind of go right in between the two players who are going to be in the middle of the field. However, after the ball is snapped, what you're going to notice is that the player, really both Pittsburgh players move further in. And one of them, I'm assuming, was supposed to stay deep here and at least a little bit deeper and pick up a potential deep route over the middle. Neither one did. And because of this, Brady sees this. He notices this. He now can make the read that I should throw the ball deep. And that's what he's going to end up doing. And it's a very good throw. It gets him a touchdown, and that's largely just due to a mistake by the defense, but also, it was a good play to take advantage of that mistake, and Brady had to make the read, and you will have to make some post-snap reads. You have to do that regardless, but that's pretty much as complex as it gets, and far more often, a deep ball, the decision that a quarterback has to make is something like this. It's a cover 2 man, and it's Josh Gordon. He's going to be running over the middle. And Gordon's going to run a really good route here. You watch how he's going to kind of fake as though he's going to be going a little bit further down. And because of this, you notice the safety, his hips are turned to where he's now facing the sideline. So Gordon, who's then going to cut further up towards the middle of the field, is going to get open. And so Brady says, okay, I see this. I see this player is going to get open, so I should make a throw in that direction because my player is about to get open. That's pretty simple, and, he makes a good throw, and they're able to get the completion. Again, good throw. But again, I think that one of the real reasons why you see that Brady is really statistically much better at throwing underneath 20 yards than throwing further than 20 yards, and his passer rating is higher in that situation, whereas usually even the worst deep ball throwers' passer rating still goes up the further down the field you start to talk about. The reason why Brady's stats drop off further down the field isn't because he's bad at those deep balls. He's still really just as good as almost anybody. There's a few of the best guys at throwing the ball deep that are better, but for the most part he is if he might not be an A+, but he still is an A deep ball thrower. The difference is that he's just so good at those medium range throws and those short throws that he can completely, dominate in that area. I mean, think about the 2007 season I was talking about, where his passer rating was just over 100, even though it was such a great season and he had prime Randy Moss and everything. But the reality is many quarterbacks would love to have a 100 passer rating. The difference is that, Brady is so good, his overall passer rating was 117. And so think about how good he had to have been just in those medium range throws to get it that high. He's just so good at that, he just has to be okay in the deep ball area, and he's much better than okay. And so does he have the deep ball to, fit into this Bruce Arians system? Yeah, he does. I mean, I think there's enough evidence to prove that. He hit on more passes over 20 yards down the field last year than he did in 2007 with prime Randy Moss. That's just a fact, at least percentage-wise. But what's also interesting, I think, is that you'd be a fool to only have Brady throw the ball down the field because that's not exactly where he excels. He excels at making these pre-snap reads and making these quick decisions. And really, there's not many pre-snap reads or quick decisions you can make with balls deep down the field. A lot of those football IQ plays by a quarterback come in, usually around where the linebackers are and where maybe a safety who's in the box might be. Things over the middle, not necessarily things that are deep, which is really where Brady thrives. So can Brady still play some of these, Bruce Arians vertical routes down the field? Of course he can. But I think there's no chance that Tampa Bay doesn't adjust their offense somewhat to fit Brady's strengths. I just can't see it happening. But that's just what I think. What do you guys think? I think it's an interesting topic. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.